Hello, I'm Oral, and welcome to Oral Gibbs Live. My guest is Mr. Gumbs, Mr. Alexander Gumbs. He's Chief Executive Officer for Port St. Martin. How are you doing, sir?
I'm good, Mr. Gibbs. Thank you so much for having us here on the show here today again.
Well, it's good to have you in the program to speak about the Port of St. Martin, which is an amazing place when you look at it. Compared to our neighbors, there's nothing to compare to it, right?
Yeah. No, definitely. I think Port St. Martin is still one of the best ports in the region in the Caribbean, so to say. And, many still benchmark the port in terms of how to do things well. I think the port is still one of the frequent, and not even a port, but St. Martin at large is one of the frequent spoken about destinations and ports in the industry.
But it's quite amazing because when you look at Port St. Martin, sometimes people don't realize the traffic that passed through there. Not just cruise, but also cargo.
Yes, indeed. And that is something I think we've been working on for the last, I want to say 6 to 12 months, Mr. Gibbs, is bringing a bit more attention from the maritime industry as a whole. So not only cruise, but also looking at, the importance of the cargo business pillar for Port St. Martin Group, and also from the yachting segment. Frequently when persons hear port, the port St. Martin, they automatically think about the cruise segment of the business. But what we focus on a lot with kids groups and students, we had a lot of summer camp students at the port as well over the last month and a half. And we've tried to put a lot of focus on the cargo segment so people could truly understand the importance of, the logistic hub that we manage there in Point Blanche.
You're Chief Executive Officer for the port. How long now?
So I'm now going on 2 years as a CEO of Port St. Martin Group. September 2023 would be 2 years in the seat.
Time goes very fast.
Time definitely goes really fast, Mr. Gibbs. If I look at our team and where we are now from when I first started out, definitely I'm seeing a shift, I'm seeing growth, I'm seeing opportunities being created. I'm seeing a group of employees who are coming together from an organizational citizenship perspective. So even though it's going fast, I think our team and myself are seeing the steps towards where we would like to take the company.
I think what's also very amazing, and a lot of local people also admire that, is that you is a St. Martin born person. You were born here, right?
Yes, I was born here in St. Martin. So definitely a pleasure having had the opportunity to first and foremost apply, go through the process and being selected as the CEO of the company. And, also taking into account the experiences from working on the other side of the business, from the cruise side of the business. For me, it's definitely a pleasure being here as a local born St. Martin.
The reason why I bring that up is because too often we think that, people can't do it. And you was working at the port, and then you got hired with a big cruise company.
Yeah, indeed. Someone once told me, your success is in your own hands, right? So you get opportunities along the way, but it's also what you do with those opportunities and your character and your proactiveness and commitments. Yeah. And thankfully, because of those traits, I was indeed headhunted by one of the brands. I worked with them and also throughout the beginning of the pandemic. And at a given point in time, I realized that I wanted to be part of what's going on. Back in St. Martin, at the time, the role for CEO became vacant, so I resigned from my role at the cruise brand. And I applied to become the CEO of the port. And I think out of more than 20 persons, I was the top candidate selected.
Well, it's proof that our people can do it. And the port is one facility where there are a lot of our own people running the operation. I think that's good.
Yes, that's also important for us looking at internal leaders, so division leaders or department leaders. And also, of course, looking at how best do we create a chart for succession. So not because you're in a role for 15, 20 years, meaning I'm in a role forever. So also looking within the company, that's exercises that has been ongoing in terms of looking at, okay, how best do we craft, mold, and build the next generation, right? And I see that, and I say that because I myself started at a port as an intern back in 2010. I did one internship at a port, and then I went back to the Netherlands. I did my thesis at a port, and I had the opportunity to come back and work. And over the years, with opportunities and drive, I was able to develop and also hold other positions over the years. So, I also fully believe in internship programs, but also how do we best foster the next generation of professionals to be able to take up leadership positions as we move ahead.
When you look at Port St. Martin and you look at St. Thomas and the Bahamas, the Dominican Republic, who's our biggest competitor, you think, in terms of port and cruise facilities?
Yeah. So that is a very interesting question, Mr. Gibbs. I think the manner in which we looked at competition in the past is a bit different than now. The matrix of countries that you made mention of, the Bahamas, for example, is a huge cruise destination, more than 3 million cruise passengers annually, but they have a strategic advantage of being within the 3 and 4 day cruises. So as much as we would want to say we want to compete, we cannot. The Dominican Republic, a bit more southwest than us, and at the same time, they have a private port. So they have a private port by Carnival Corp. And the Dominican Republic has several cruise ports, a huge country. You could actually create an itinerary going to the Dominican Republic alone and stop at 3 cruise ports over 5 days. St. Thomas, on the other hand, has a similar product to St. Martin in terms of the experience. Of course, St. Martin is rated a bit higher in terms of that regard, but also being a U.S. state, right, a U.S. country, they have some advantages over us. So I would say definitely St. Thomas, out of the 3 countries that you mentioned, would be the largest competitor. But at the same time, the success of St. Martin also relies on the success of St. Thomas. So on one end, you can say St. Thomas is your competition because at times we fight for the same itineraries, or we, let's say, challenge the industry for the same itineraries. But there's a vast majority of times where St. Martin and St. Thomas is in the same itinerary. Yeah. So we also rely on good performing destinations to build itineraries that will come to the Eastern Caribbean. So we truly also rely on the innovativeness and the development of St. Thomas, which would assist St. Martin. If we look at San Juan, for example, for many years, San Juan has been one of the key factors of St. Martin's success as well. Because vessels home porting out of San Juan in the past frequently came to St. Martin. Right before the pandemic, San Juan had some issues where brands pulled from San Juan, and St. Martin suffered from that because those were the ships that came on Saturday and Sunday, and sometime on Tuesdays. Even in the off season as we are now, if you look at the matrix of that business, that's 7-8 cruise calls you're missing a month that came directly from San Juan as a home port. So we also very much depend on the successes and the continuation of business in other destinations that makes the product St. Martin what we are today.
What I noticed when you mentioned San Juan, I didn't mention San Juan, and a few years ago, about 10, 12 years ago, I was in San Juan at a hotel I used to love to go to. And I noticed there was a change in service, a change in the attitude of employees and everything else. What was told to me is that home porting changed that because a lot of visitors came in, they weren't tipping, it was just different. And that affected even the whole attitude of employees who were accustomed to giving service and getting the tips for it. And I wonder if you ever heard about that. That's part of the kind of a negative part when you have a good hotel and they get a part of that home porting, that things change because most cruise visitors don't really want to tip because everything is already included.
That could be a symbol of change of business dynamics indeed and trends. From a cruise standpoint, your gratuities predominantly are prepaid with your ticket price. But from the hotel standpoint, of course, that's a bit different. What we've seen as well with San Juan is a lot of the Puerto Ricanians themselves were taking cruises out of Puerto Rico to
And they
St.
love
Martin.
St. Martin.
And they love St.
Yeah.
Martin as well. What we've seen is on Saturdays, the shops in the port actually used to run out of cheese because they used to buy the large wheel
Yeah,
of cheese
right.
in boxes and to bring back to San Juan. So that is a change in dynamics indeed
that's not
we've
there
seen. Hardly any there. So I think there's only one ship right now home porting out of San Juan, where there were 3-4 ships home porting prior, coming to St. Martin. I see Norwegian Cruise Lines is actually going to deploy one of the newest ships in San Juan. Let's see if Carnival Corp and also Royal Caribbean follow suit in the coming year or two in terms of their deployment through San Juan to St. Martin. And you know, the business dynamics has changed a bit in the sense that flying cruise is always a bit more difficult than driving cruise, right? So if you can drive to a cruise port, jump on your ship and take a cruise, it's less hassle, it costs less, etc., than to fly to a destination like San Juan, for example, or St. Martin, or Barbados, or Guadeloupe, you know, those destinations that actually home port in a region, and then take a cruise from those destinations. So that also has an impact in the economic expenditure, let's say, of the passengers in that regard. So those are all things that are being weighed.
But I was really surprised when I was in Puerto Rico and I asked the persons at the front desk, etc., where they go on vacation. They all said St. Martin. They love St. Martin for the jewelry and the liquor. But all that has changed. St. Martin has become so expensive now too. It's amazing.
Yeah, things have changed over the years, indeed, from a shopping perspective as well. So as much as we can say we are the duty-free stop in the Caribbean, which we are, we still have very much competitive prices. But in certain markets, right, there's other areas that where products are just as expensive or even more expensive than in the U.S. or on the cruise ships. Because let's be honest, the cruise ships also has jewelry stores, etc., that actually can match certain prices that you have on island. I think one of the things that we've still not fully grasped as yet as a destination is what makes us unique from a product sales perspective. So yes, we sell a lot of products that can be found on an international market, but what is still missing is the unique elements that's reflective to the Caribbean one, and also passengers are also looking for a lot of locally made things. You know, recently I attended a show and locally from a local person, and they had a panel with 3 entrepreneurs who were creating locally made products, soaps and candles, etc. But you know, tourists are looking for those opportunities. Also, what you've seen in terms of trends, they're not only necessarily looking at purchasing products when they are on island, but they're more also focused on services. So services in terms of experiences, being able to venture into the destination, having the unique things. I think that is something that we're still lagging on from a product perspective that can make St. Martin a bit more unique, and that can potentially complement the increase in expenditure of cruise passengers on the island. You know, you have the Amazon phenomenon. Anyone can order on Amazon these days. It was not the same 5 years, 6 years, 7 years ago. And also, of course, because of that, these jewelry stores, etc., or brands rather, also have their own exclusive brands and lines on the Amazons and on eBay, etc. So it's no longer like I'm just buying from a Mr. Gibbs. No, I'm buying from a store directly on top of such a platform. That makes it a lot more secure. So, you know, I must say from a product perspective, it's become a lot more difficult to sell to tourists in general terms. But I think we also have to look at the opportunity and looking at how best do we differentiate our product mix in town. Because, you know, if you go on back street, it's a lot of almost the same, and if you go on front street, it's a lot more of basically the same. How do we bridge the gap in terms of looking into what people truly would like when they purchase stuff? I think that still has to be done. It's not clear.
What I noticed when you look at the Bahamas and St. Thomas and St. Martin, I think the last time I saw it, that was like 12 years ago, is that St. Martin have a better facility when tourists arrive on the ship than St. Thomas and the Bahamas.
Definitely, that is still the case. I think our facilities definitely creates a sense of place. So it's very important when you travel, you have a sense of place, a sense of time, and then you can recalibrate to a new destination. And I frequently walk amongst the passengers when we have ships and just do a bit of a mystery shopping to hear what they say about a destination in the port and ask them how the day was and look at the bags to see what type of shopping they did. So for me, that's important to do once or twice a week once ships is in port. But I frequently hear indeed, oh, this is such a beautiful port. Oh, this is such a nice port. It's quiet. It's clean. Right now, we're actually undertaking a full revamp of the cruise facilities. So the buildings owned by the port, we are actually repainting, freshening the place up, adding a bit more photo op opportunities within, and just to get the vibe improve from where it is now. But overall, yes, if we look at some of those competing destinations, I do think that we have a superior product as is now. But we also have to be very cognizant of what competition is doing, because they too are spending millions and millions of dollars in terms of developments and enhancements. The Bahamas, for example, in Nassau, which is actually operated by a third-party company, but they just completed a 5-year project, a 4.5-year project, more than $100 million. If you look at the Bahamas as well, there's several of the private-owned islands that is also being enhanced by the cruise industry. I just read one by one of the cruise lines. They're going to spend an additional $100 million in developments. Then there's the other brand that I worked for. They are carrying out a $250 million project in Freeport, Grand Bahama. If you look at St. Thomas, they are preparing for a new cruise berth. If you look at Antigua, they just completed some expansions. St. Kitts just completed some expansions. Martinique is looking towards expanding. So if we look at the industry, and in home porting as well. So if you look at the industry is very much moving and very aggressive. We will also be announcing pretty soon some strategic initiatives from a port standpoint. Some that has been in a pipeline for many years but could not have been carried out because of Hurricane Irma and the pandemic, etc. And some, looking at the state of the business today and better positioning St. Martin in that regard. And for us, it's not about volume alone, it's quality. So it's not about going to 8 cruise ships and then have more traffic congestion, because that will only negatively impact the reviews of the destination, which will also negatively impact the demand to come to St. Martin. So we have to look at that very carefully in terms of what we do. I think there's a lot of work to be done from an infrastructure standpoint as well before we can increase cruise arrival volume in terms of numbers. But we're very much looking at customer experience, very much looking at, okay, how best can we, let's say, trigger higher expenses in a destination in terms of expenditures from the guests. So we're looking at these things and we're trying best to use the dollars that we have for it to invest, but every dollar to be invested wisely in that regard.
In case you've just joined us, I'm Oral Gibbs. This is Oral Gibbs Law. My guest is Chief Executive Officer for Port St. Martin. You are listening to us on Hot 99.9 FM radio or watching us on YouTube or Facebook. We're here with Mr. Alexander Gumbs. And Mr. Gumbs, I listened to all the things you've said there. And the thing is, St. Martin is the smallest of all of them. If we go along the border side of this, 16 square miles, and Guadeloupe, Martinique, they have more than one port. I noticed ships can pull into, I think, 2 different ports. St. Thomas, the same thing. Is there any possibility in St. Martin for another location for port? Or That's impossible. You know,
Mr. Gibbs, I love that question, and I feel like you had some pre-discussions on a topic. But no, definitely, that has been, I think, one of the items that the port has looked at for many years in terms of alternative locations. One, as there's some brands, right? The more higher end brands, they don't necessarily want to be, some of them don't necessarily want to be in the same facility as the larger ships, because one, you have a small ship and a large ship, and we know how that goes from a competition standpoint. But two, they also are offering on board the ships their passengers a unique experience with a crew ratio of 2-to-1, whereas the larger ships might be 4 or 5-to-1. So from a service level perspective, they're also looking at receiving higher service levels and attention at more unique port opportunities that they might be, for example, the only ship in port. So we see that from the smaller brands. And then we also look at it from a sheer logistics standpoint, where there's limited opportunities in terms of increasing the infrastructure road network from Point Blanche to, let's say, the roundabout at Sundial School. There's not much you can do there to increase the road network in terms of more roads.
Right.
So, that also creates a challenge for us at times with multiple ships in port. You also have the cargo facilities as in Point Blanche. You have residents are in Point Blanche. You have businesses, other businesses that's in Point Blanche along that route. So it becomes a logistic challenge at times that we best try and monitor and manage by how tours are dispatched. But at the same time, I do think the destination, in particular that side, I think there's two unique areas where there's an opportunity still for a second cruise facilities. One of which we are looking at and trying to have some discussions with government to bring that discussion up. And I do think, yes, there's an opportunity there for us to create a second facility more for mid to smaller class ships, offering more high-end services, and also potentially looking at the home porting market from that standpoint as well. Yes.
When you look at this past season, how you feel about the cruise arrivals?
This past season, I think, was relatively well. Definitely, if I look at year to date, so if I look at January to where we are now, we've more than double the same period of last year.
Yeah.
From January to now, we've also basically about 10,000 passengers at this day what we record, less than the entire year of last year. So by the end of June, we will surpass the entire arrivals from 2022. So we are on the right track. We're rebounding well. If I look at the upcoming high season as well, there's almost more than a million passengers actually between October and April next year. So between that period of 5 months, there'll be more than 1 million passengers in the high season. So that's season 23-24. And, we are almost there. We are about, I want to say, from a high season perspective, almost equal to where we were prior to the pandemic. Mm-hmm. But if we go back to some of the higher yielding years, so being 2015, 14, and 16, we're still about 15% lower than those levels. So that's still significant work to be done. We've seen the high seasons are comparable, but the off seasons are still a challenge. And I think I alluded earlier briefly to San Juan, but during the pandemic, more than 35 ships were sold. And from those ships that were sold, obviously they were the older ships. Now, the older ships is what stayed in the Caribbean during the off season, during the summer months, and the brands will send newer ships predominantly to Europe and to Alaska and to Asia. Now, because those ships were sold that stayed in the Caribbean in the summer, it affected our business from San Juan. So like I said, at any given time, on a month in the summer months, we missed between 5 to 8 cruise calls because those ships are sold. Another trigger that is hampering the destinations that's a bit further east, and also those that are further south, is the cost of fuel. Remember, the brands predominantly create their itineraries 12 to 24 months in advance. So when they make certain strategic decisions, those decisions last for 12 to 24 months. During the pandemic, we've seen what happened to the barrel price of fuel as well. And we've seen a trend of many brands taking ships and keeping them a bit closer to the home ports. So not necessarily doing a 7, 8, 9, or 10-day cruises, what we fall into, but more doing the 3 to 5 day cruises. And many would not realize, but actually on a 4-day or 5-day cruise, the yields, meaning the profits on the ship, general terms, are most of the time much higher than a 7, 8-day cruise. So when you looked at the pandemic, the brands basically had to recapitalize on their loans. They had to take out new loans at very high percentage rates. I've heard some brands, I read some brands up to 13, 14% interest on some of the loans. So they had to take a very aggressive approach in terms of increasing their revenues exponentially, and also at the same time mitigating additional costs through fuel. So that is also something that has impacted our business return, as well as one of the countries a bit further away from the home ports in Miami and Orlando, etc.
Well, I know there's a ship, MSC, that's a company. Mm-hmm. They had a home port in Martinique just recently.
Yeah.
I'm surprised they're going that far south.
Yeah, well, MSC actually has a unique relationship with both Martinique and Guadeloupe. They've been home porting there for many, many years. Many years before St. Martin.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and because of the pandemic and the restrictions, we had certain opportunities in the market, whereas I think government allowed business returning faster than some of the other destinations. We capitalized on those opportunities, and that's why we had MSC home porting out to St. Martin. But traditionally, MSC has been home porting in those two destinations for many, many, many
And they're a
years.
European company, right?
Yes, correct. Italian-owned company, yeah. So for many years, they've been doing that. We still do great business with MSC. Also in discussion of looking at certain home porting projects here in St. Martin, etc. But yeah, that is the reason.
What surprised you most about this business?
What is actually surprising, Mr. Gibbs, that the business goes in waves, right? So you'll have 2-3 years of top business, and then you'll fall off a bit, and then you'll go back up. And that is because the brands cannot, and at first I did not really understand it, but the brands, if you have, for example, a Wonder of the Seas by the largest cruise ship in the world, that one ship cannot run one itinerary for 5 years, because you have people who want to go on the same ship, but with like different experiences. And that is one thing that we have to look at, that the ships has to shift based on the move of the market, but it's also up to the destination to really and truly have the marketing material out there to continue with the buzz of the destination, which I think we have to work on in that regard and continue to push the buzz of the business. But from our line of business, what is interesting, Mr. Gibbs, that no day is the same. Every day something is different. It starts from whatever time you wake up to whatever time you go sleep, and at times you're actually you get calls during your sleep, and you have to deal with it as well. And that's beautiful. That's unique. I think we have a great team at a port, and that for me is a pleasure.
Now, someone asked me who I'm going to have on the show. And I told him I'm going to have Alexander Gumbs from the port. The person says to me, can you ask him about the traffic around the port in terms of people hanging out there, begging tourists for rentals, etc.? What's going on? Is there anything the port can do to stop that with all those vendors and so outside of the port?
That has been as well a challenge for many, many years. And I think various approaches were tried, but it doesn't work. Structurally, it doesn't work. So you would have law enforcement will come, they will clean the area up, and within 15, 20 minutes after they leave, the same situation. As a port, we also have no authority to physically move persons from public spaces, as where they are is not port zone, it's public space. So we rely on the cooperation, which we do receive, and they do frequent once we have ships, etc., but it is not structural. One of the things that we have in the pipeline is in collaboration with the development that's coming next door with Royal Caribbean, the water park and the hotel by the local consortium group, is basically we already have a walk path on the water side. So the idea would be from on the water side to connect the walking path straight through Chesterfields, through the vacant lot, and then to Bobby's Marina onto the boardwalk.
So they won't have to come onto the main road.
They won't have to come on the main road, because we do also see walking on the main road as a potential safety hazard. As you know, we have a lot of container traffic moving. There's heavy equipment that may be picking up aggregates, etc., from the cargo port. So we are very cognizant and aware, and also a bit concerned in terms of the overall safety aspect. Also, if you look at it from an experience perspective, it's a more pleasant experience walking along the waterside with beautiful trees, you know, having a full view of the bay. So it also increases the experience going down into town, because Mr. Gibbs, you know, a huge percentage of passengers actually walk, you know, north of 20% of the passengers actually walk. Last statistics that we saw, about 20% of the passengers walk. And that is also because of how, let's say, known St. Martin is as a cruise destination. It's relatively very safe. Phillipsburg is about a mile away. And what we have to take into account is at least 30% of the passengers been here more than twice. So I think the calculation was 3.92 times that they've been here, more than 30% of the passengers. So in that regard, you know, they walk. You're even seeing the trend now of passengers taking pay buses, right? And that's because they've been here several times and understand the mechanisms and feel comfortable in our country in that regard. So that's also a very different dynamic of how the business is changing as well.
I see some of the islands have police officers at the facility outside. Is that difficult to get in St. Martin?
It's not difficult, but I think that also creates a catch-22 situation at times. And a catch-22 situation is I've experienced it in one of the other destinations indeed. And the first thing I ask myself as an experienced cruiser, as a executive in a business, but the first thing I ask myself is it safe to really walk around in this area, right? That was the first question I have. So it also creates a negative light at times, having passengers truly think about shopping or not, venturing out into the countries or not. So for us, it's not needed. We do have obviously the support of the Corps Police St. Martin, who frequents the facilities. We have a office in the port cargo area that customs and immigration is at. There's also the military that's stationed in the Gazerna at the cargo area, and thankfully we have not had any situations in that regard. Actually, right now we have a group of employees from various departments that are actually doing the BAFPOL training. So that for us is also important in looking at additional security besides of the security service provider that we hire or our security in-house staff, that more persons on the facility be vigilant and cognizant and can report a threat and, you know, if needed, also assist with subduing threats. So that is something that we're giving the tools to our employees who are interested in that.
Because I saw a video of someone trying to pull back from a cruise visitor, and I think it was quite disturbing. And that was outside. It's a public area. But if it happens too frequently, then it becomes a problem. Then
it definitely becomes a problem, Mr. Gibbs, and that's why it's high on the agenda that we have the alternative routing in place. They're doing some works right now in the area. I think the facilities next to Chesterfields or at Chesterfields are doing some works. As soon as they're finished with their works, we will be clearing out that walk path, etc. So it's definitely one that has my concern. We've been speaking with the stakeholders for the last 5-6 months, And again, it's all about a customer experience and having them feel safe. Like I said earlier, a sense of place, a sense of time, and no harassment and haggling and what we see at times.
I think we'll see that in the next 12 to 18 months.
Before. The intention is to actually have that walk path open for this high season upcoming.
Wow,
so
good.
before that. And in reality, the concrete is already poured, etc. There's some work still to be done, as it was there already for about 10 years. But it was under sand, so there was some damages from the passing hurricanes. But we're hoping to have that walk path opened before, or by rather, the upcoming high season. Yeah.
All right. We're speaking with Mr. Alexander Gumbs. Mr. Gumbs is the Chief Executive Officer for Port St. Martin. And when we come back, we're going to continue speaking with Mr. Gumbs right here on Oral Gibbs Live.
Hey, don't guess about your insurance. Be sure that you're covered. Like with your car, like your home. Be sure to be covered in case of a fire, flood, hurricane, or some other natural disaster. And travel insurance, because you never know what could happen when you're on vacation. You could lose your passport, your luggage, or have an accident. So be sure that you're covered.
Insure yourself fast and easy with Be Sure from the Windward Islands Bank Limited. Visit your preferred WIB branch, WIB Insurance Services, or BeSureStMartin.com. Get your Be Sure insurance at the Windward Islands Bank, your partners in progress.
For real? Somebody came in here and steal my curtains? Well, it's a good thing I'm insured with Be Sure, because even the contents of my apartment are covered. Don't play guessing games with your insurance. Be sure.
Are you be sure? Be sure.
My guest here on the Oral Gibbs Live is Chief Executive Officer for Port St. Martin, Mr. Alexander Gumbs, and we're here speaking with him on Oral Gibbs Live on Hot 99.9 FM radio, or Facebook and YouTube. St. Martin's such a unique place, and all the visitors that come to St. Martin, there was a time when they used to just flock to Orient Bay. That doesn't happen anymore.
No. The age of internet, the age of Facebook and Instagram, where a lot of other places now are going viral and persons are now seeing, other areas that can be experienced on island. And that's the beauty of trends and changes, that yes, for many years, a certain area may have been the hot spot, but over time, other areas were encountered and shared and also became very popular. But Orient is still a very popular cruise destination. I think there's a lot of places on the front side that passengers truly enjoy, but I think passengers are now trying to explore further into the country, other areas that were not tapped into.
And what I noticed is that going on a boat off to the airport to see the planes coming in, or going down there in buses, that's become a very popular thing now.
Very popular because of, again, what has been shown online on a lot of these viral platforms on Instagram, etc. And, if you look at it from a water experience standpoint, I think St. Martin still has a lot more to offer. The vast majority of the passengers take buses around the island, which many complain because of traffic. But I think if you look at it from a water network perspective, there's still a lot of untapped areas to create great experiences for passengers, but via boats, via the water side. Yeah.
And is there any problems with the front side in terms of regulations and boats carrying visitors? Because I heard at one time during the pandemic that was a big issue.
Yeah, during the pandemic, indeed, there were some regulations where you could have driven to the front side, but you could not have gone to the front side with Dutch flag boats. That is no longer the case. I am only aware of one challenge one operator is having here out of Simpson Bay, but work with the cruise passengers in terms of bringing the passengers to Grand Islet on their dinghy-like vessels. So I know that is an issue, but other than that, I think there's a great working relationship between both sides, and the passengers also very much experience and enjoy being able to say that, hey, I've been to a French territory and a Dutch territory, and these were the experiences.
I smile because I remember the first time I went to Las Vegas. It was in 2001. And it was at went to an NAB convention. It was great, man. We had police escort, everything from the hotel to the convention center. After that year, it never happened again, you know. But I think back about it because during the season in St. Martin, we see sometimes these big buses with police escort flying up Simpson Bay to the port. Do they call you all to tell you at the port that they have a problem with traffic, they can't get out, and then you send police to escort them?
Yeah, so there's a tripartite communication line open between the police, the taxi association, and the port from an operations perspective. And yes, at times the police do facilitate with getting the buses back to the port because of traffic. And that's what I said earlier as well in the program, that for us, you know, looking at developments, it's not only about increasing volume, because we do have some sticking points with traffic, but it's also how best do we enhance the experience. And, you know, having police escort buses, it's not the way to go. Unfortunately, we've had to be doing this for many years now because of, you know, you tell passengers, okay, at 3 o'clock, we need to leave Sunset Beach Bar, but the passengers arrive back at 3:30. And then 3:30 is the peak of the traffic. So, you know, we try best to facilitate, the police and the taxi association try best to facilitate in terms of getting the passengers back to the ship on time, but it's not the ideal solution. And that's why we need to look at, you know, alternative infrastructure options that can help better alleviate the traffic, because, you know, every household have 2-3 cars. Now you have stayover passengers. Cruise passengers don't necessarily rent as much cars as stayover, but you have the big coach buses with tours, and that becomes a challenge at times.
What do you get from the cruise industry in terms of what's really key to St. Martin? Because I know the FCCA do a lot of service, etc. They love St. Martin. From my experience in speaking with executives from that association, they really love St. Martin.
Yeah.
But what do they say to you in terms of what's our key point, and at the same time, what they're concerned about, if you don't mind sharing with us?
Yeah, for us, I think one of the key things that St. Martin definitely has above many of the other destinations is the water taxi system. So that is still one of the best infrastructural and logistic option that we have, that FCCA themselves have tried benchmarking other destinations to bring, but never really come to fruition. So being able to transit persons by water is a huge asset, and that's why I said a while ago as well, we as a collective need to see how best we can expand on that route of transporting people via water to Simpson Bay, to Maho, etc., etc. And one of the other points on a total different part of the spectrum, I think one of the key things that they've said to the destination in general terms is try and best showcase what is authentic St. Martin. And now saying authentic St. Martin can be very difficult because we are very multicultural here, right? We are a melting pot, a salad bowl, 120 something different nationalities. So presenting unique St. Martin, I think, can be a challenge, but presenting unique St. Martin not only from a cultural experience standpoint, which is one, but also from a product sales standpoint as well. I think those are the two areas that has been recommended for us to further look at. If you look at the surveys, I think one of the lowest scoring items is like history and museums, for example, right? And that year we had a huge influx. We also extrapolate the weighing factor of it. That year we had a lot of European cruise guests, and that was the year when a survey was done. So it was influenced by the Europeans, and European passengers are totally different than American passengers, right? American passengers wants the fast go, drink, shopping, crazy experience with maybe some activities, energy like zip lining and stuff like that. The European passengers are traditionally what we've seen a bit older, so they're a bit slower paced, probably bus tours, want stops to learn about history, wants to hear about a culture. and not necessarily shop as much. So that is what we've seen in general terms in those dynamics. So it also has to do with the consumer trend of the year,
And the
demographics
yeah.
rather.
And the American person is coming to St. Martin, like you said earlier, more than twice
Yeah.
in their lifetime in terms of cruise. So, yeah, I remember meeting a couple who had taken more than 60 cruises on Royal Caribbean throughout all the different destinations. That was amazing. And this particular couple got a free trip because of all of that travel. So it's amazing. But when you look at St. Martin and what we are doing, your personal opinion as the CEO of the port, you think we can do more? What you would like to see?
There's always room for improvement, so definitely we can do more. One of the key things that I think we need to better do a job on is preparing the next generation for the future.
That's going to be a challenge.
Yeah, so I think that is one of the key things, as there's no continuity in what we're doing. From a tourism perspective, I frequently say this, but to this date, for example, tourism is our most important market, and not one tourism class is given to kids in kindergarten and or primary school. Whereas from kindergarten, my daughter at almost 2 years old now, when she's getting into learning to color, she should be coloring cruise ships and planes and tourists, etc., to create that perception from a very young age that we are in a very much service-oriented industry. And, that for me is one of the key things. Also, what is very important that I think we lag, and I think that's being worked on, but we're not there as yet, is the manner in which we market a destination. So not only from a port perspective, marketing through FCCA and these type of things, but I'm talking about consumer-based marketing, right? Because we're in a business-to-business market, so we actually in a business to work with the cruise brands, work with FCCA and CLIA and these type of associations, but that's business to business. We have a very limited reach to the consumers being the passengers, right? So, and when you look at that aspect of it as well, reaching to the cruise passengers, it also plays a huge role in cruise conversion. So persons who've been here several times on a cruise and then decide, hey, I'm going to take a extended vacation in St. Martin. So conversion from cruise to stay over. So, from that perspective, I do believe from a country perspective, we need to put more resources towards getting our message, our holistic message, Dutch and French, whatever the tagline is of St. Martin, to the consumers, but a holistic approach that the industries within on island could also share that message, right? So that message can be applicable to the airport and the port and Telem and the hotels, etc., that when they travel too, they can further carry that brand, right? Because if you go to India, Russia, wherever you go in the world and you ask for Coca-Cola, it's the same Coca-Cola box. It's the red, white with the same writings, right? And at times, I think what we do, unfortunately, on island is we waste resources in a sense that, the port has its own brand image and we have our own marketing stuff. The airport has their own, SHTA has their own, the Marine Trade Association does their own thing. The tourist office is pushing their brand, which is a country brand, but everyone is not adopting it. So, from that perspective, I feel like we need, and I'm speaking from a marketing perspective, that's my background, but from a marketing sales perspective, we are missing that holistic approach in terms of truly touching the consumers, truly sharing with the consumers what St. Martin has to offer and why St. Martin is the place to take your vacation. And that's for me one of the key things.
I'm speaking here with Mr. Alexander Gumbs, who is the Chief Executive Officer for Port St. Martin. Mr. Gumbs, when you look at St. Martin, the transformation of our people out of the service industry is pretty frightening. In other words, we don't longer manage many hotels like in the past. There are very little business opportunities for our people. At the port, is there still possibilities if local people have a very good business concept that they can rent to do business at the port?
Yes, so for us, it's about having the authentic experiences in the port. Of course, there's different shopping elements, so we look at it from a product mix perspective, that you have someone who's doing cigars, and you had someone doing chocolates, and then you had someone with the Caribbean food and the French food, etc. But there's always opportunities. But you also have, with the port standpoint, Mr. Gibbs, if you have a good location, you're gonna make sure that you pay rent on time. You're gonna make sure that you give the best service, because you never want to lose that location. Very seldomly you will see vacant units. I think the first time in many years we had about half a year ago, and at that point in time we had the ads out in the newspaper, and we had ads out on our social media pages, etc. And everyone who applied basically went through an interviewing process, and then a few persons were selected to fill those slots. So very, very seldom it happens. But what we've done since I'm there, once a unit becomes vacant, we put it out on a public platform. Persons interested can send in their business portfolio and the concept of what they would like to offer, and then we see how best that can fit within what we have now. Because if we have someone, for example, rolling and selling cigars, we're not going to bring a second person to do that. So it would also go through a sort of a filtering process based on what is there already and what can complement the facility further.
And that person's still there with the cigar?
Yeah, I think that cigar has been in the port from the beginning, so 21, 22 years. Definitely a staple within the facility, and there's many other tenants that has been with the port from since its inception. So that's also beautiful, and we have great relationships with them. Yeah.
What about the Simpson Bay? There are two bridges in Simpson Bay, and Slack operate that. You care to tell us about that? You had some difficulties recently with the causeway. Yeah,
so yes, indeed. We manage and operate the Simpson Bay Bridge and the causeway. Causeway was built 10 years ago. Simpson Bay Bridge is now going through some updates. That bridge is also nearing its let's say life cycle.
So plans to widen it?
So there's some discussions now in terms of what is next for the Simpson Bay Bridge. And it's not necessarily that the bridge itself needs to widen, but in particular, it's the manner in which the pylons are placed will have to be changed. And that may change the design of the bridge.
Does that make it wider if that's done?
That would make the inlet channel and outlet wider, yes, correct. So it's not that you're dredging wider, because we already have the channel width is good, but it's just the manner in which the piles are to support the bridge should go wider. So we are looking at those discussions and having those discussions with government, of course, in terms of slack and what that would mean, and also the needed investments. It is a significant investment that would be needed to actually change the bridge out. So yeah, that is something in that regard. And the causeway, of course, we've been doing work on the lights. The lights been given some issues with the causeway for some time now. And as I said earlier in the program, we're also working on addressing some of the capital expenditure projects that was sustained from Irma. So certain things from Irma time we are basically getting going now in that regard from a financial position standpoint. And, of course, you had Irma, the company had $25 million losses. You had a pandemic, another 10, 15, almost 20 million in losses. So, the company have been through a rough patch over the last 5-6 years. And, as much as from on the outside, you would say, yeah, but they shouldn't be invested in this and doing that, etc., etc. The first thing is looking at our financial ratios. If financial ratios don't align, and it's highly impossible to make strategic investments. What we've also done over the last year is renegotiated many of our contracts to bring it to today's standards in that regard, which, of course, further assisted us with the financial position of the port, that we can say now, yes, now we can go and start making some strategic investments and developments but the financial feasibility of doing such in the past was just not possible.
And the ports still have outstanding loans? I mean, in terms of from previous investments?
Yes, of course. There's just like many other companies on Ireland, we do have outstanding loans. Those loans are all being paid accordingly. Our debt service ratios are now, back in line. I think in 2022, of course, this is public, but it is a public company, so I can say it. In 2022, we were slated to make a $4 million loss. I think we turned around and had a profit of more than $2 million. So, we turned $6 million around basically last year. The year prior, we also shortened the gap in terms of losses. And this is all because of the pandemic.
But there's still relatively small losses when you look at it compared to the facility.
Yeah, it is still relatively small losses, but a loss is a loss at the end of the day. So it's the principle and not necessarily the number. Like I said, happy that we were able to turn around from having a loss last year of $4 million to having a plus of $2 million, so a profit of $2 million. And we've also appreciate the fact that our staff also put in extra work and were also conscious of costs and expenses and projects, etc. We kept it all streamlined. I think we had quite of a frugal approach to certain things as well. And, as of 2023, when I sent my CEO message at the beginning of the year, I said, look, 2023, we're moving ahead. There's no more discussions about recovery and pandemic and this and that. No. Let's focus on really achieving what we have outlined in our high-level plan that was approved by the Council of Ministers and really getting towards the next tier and the next level of business to assure that we create a sustainable product moving ahead in that sense, also from a financial position in that sense.
Well, Mr. Gumbs, I want to thank you for being my guest on our Oral Gibbs Live. Wish you much success.
Thank you so much for having me here, Mr. Gibbs, and I thank you for the viewers for watching and tuning in as well.
All right, always a pleasure having you. Much success again.
Yes.
All right, thanks. And that's it for now. See you next time, or you can listen to us on Hot 99.9 FM radio or watch us on Facebook and YouTube. Take care. Bye.